Okay, this is Ted Ellis. I'm in the Museum Studies program at Southern University in New Orleans, Louisiana. The course assignment is for Collections Management 504. This is Ted Ellis.
Hi, my name is Sarah Bellion. I am the curator at the Museum of the Gulf Coast in Port Arthur. I have been a curator for 10 years now. I graduated from University of Idaho with a master's degree in history. I do not have a museum studies background, but I've been in the field now for 10 years.
Excellent. So the first question I have, what is the primary type of collection that this museum holds?
The Museum of the Gulf Coast is a catch-all. We have a lot of science-related, biology specifically, shells, paleontology, archaeology. We also have a large collection of military art, and we also have a collection of textiles, pioneer type items, other things like that. And on top of that, we have a Hall of Fame of musicians, athletes, and other well-known people from the Gulf Coast region between Houston and New Orleans. So we have items pertaining to filmmaking, items pertaining to blues and Cajun music and rock and roll. One of the things we're well known for is we have a replica of Janis Joplin's psychedelic Porsche.
Wow, awesome. Now, what about the staff here? Can you elaborate on that?
Like most small to mid-sized museums, this place is run by a small number of people who wear many hats. If you're not fortunate enough to get in on the ground in a large museum, you're probably going to go somewhere where your job responsibilities will be like curator, collections manager, exhibit coordinator, IT / archivist / registrar. You're going to have to be all of those things. There are 5 staff here. We have a security guard, we have an education and tour and volunteer coordinator, we have a director, we have a part-time admin who works 20 hours a week that assists the director, and then we have myself, which is everything to do with exhibits and everything to do with collections.
Wow. So Sarah, who manages the collection? Who sets the collection policy?
The collections policy at this particular institution was created and set by the board a number of years ago. I want to say about 1998. It is not real good, and I would like to have it revised, but that's not something that's happening right now. As with a lot of museums that were established in the 60s and 70s by well-meaning volunteers, this museum was created by the Department Club, which was a women's club in 1964. So they didn't really know what a museum should collect, what a museum shouldn't collect, what was going to be important in the long term. They didn't know how to take care of things. They had nothing in the books for what to do if something was damaged, and that continued even when they became the Museum of the Gulf Coast in 1994, that people just really didn't know whether or not the museum was going to continue to exist. So one of the biggest problems we face here is a whole lot of stuff that does not have adequate documentation and a lot of stuff that does not have deeds of gift.
So how often is the policy manual reviewed or updated?
A collections policy, in my opinion, should be renewed or updated. I would say every 5 to 10 years you should look at it and just see what's changed, particularly if you have a section in your policy about digitization, because one thing a lot of museums are not doing is migrating data. And one of the big things I've done since I've been here has been to get a lot of the data out of the older formats, trying to update the access to it, pulling stuff off of floppy disks, so that we don't lose our own history and the history of our collections when we get a new computer with a new operating system or we start using a new kind of software. I've also spearheaded getting some 8 and 16 millimeter video digitized so we can share it on social media, we can use it for exhibits, and we can also then provide access to it in a way that we were not able to before.
Wow, that is phenomenal, and it seems like it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, but if you can't get your information, you're really not doing your job as a collections manager. You have to make sure that when something comes up, it should be accessible. You want to be able to go, hey, I got that, and be able to get the file that you need if someone calls and asks. Okay, so I did explain that when I came here, that there was a policy for the collections which was already in place. However, I previously worked at the Scurry County Museum in Snyder, Texas, and that museum did not have a collections policy when I started in 2010. So along with the director, and I had an assistant who was a longtime museum volunteer, and a member of the board, we wrote a collections policy for that museum. It took us about 6 to 8 months to write it and then to get the board to agree to it. One of the things we wanted to tackle with that museum's collections policy was having objects that are, one, germane to the museum's mission. So they relate to what the museum's trying to do. In that case, to preserve and educate on the history of West Texas. This, two, items that the museum could use for exhibition. Museums get donated a lot of things that we don't want, we don't need. Stuff like old newspapers that are falling apart, things that are commemorative items. Everybody saved the same commemorative paperweight. We certainly don't need 20 of them. And the last of all was to accept things that were in a condition that was conducive to us preserving them. Again, being in West Texas, we had a lot of people bring us things that were in barns, things that had had animals damage them, had been damaged by mud, weather, heat, and we want to try to get away from that because like many small museums, when I was at the Scurry County Museum, that museum did not have a budget for conservation. So better to turn away items that are not able to be preserved than to take on things that are just going to continue to deteriorate and pose hazards to the rest of the collection. So sometimes it means you have to say no, and it's not always easy to say no, but if an item isn't relevant to the museum's mission, if it doesn't have potential for exhibition, and it is not in good condition, you probably shouldn't take it. And we wanted our collections manual to reflect that these are important factors to consider when you're accessioning or accepting items to the museum.
Wonderful. Now, what are your thoughts on deaccession?
Sometimes you have to do it, and you really should ask yourself those same questions I was talking about with selecting items to deaccession an item. Can we reasonably preserve this item? Should we reasonably preserve this item? Is it worth it in its historical value or artistic value that we dedicate our time and resources to it? I mean, we have a giant job here. We have 35,000 items in the collection. They cover all kinds of different spheres, whether we're talking about history or maritime or military or art, and we have 39,000 square feet. So somewhere in there, we have to decide that something is too big, it's too messed up, or it isn't significant enough to warrant trying to preserve in perpetuity. When you accession an item, you're trying to keep it forever, and if we don't see a reason to keep it forever, let it go.
Okay. Now, have you had any challenges with loans? Is there a loan policy in place here?
The loan policy that's in place here is not good. We've been working on trying to get people accustomed to a more responsible loan policy. Again, the museum was started by a lot of people that had no museum background, and they had allowed a lot of long-term indefinite loans. If you talk to any museum professional and you say, you know, indefinite, long-term, or permanent loan, you're going to see them cringe because this is never good. A permanent loan means that technically you don't have custody of the item. So if so-and-so passes away and their kid decides they want to sell it for whatever they can get for it, you are legally obligated in most cases to return the property. And they can come by and get something without necessarily giving you much warning. I've had to return several items that were on permanent loan here because they belonged to someone who had passed away and their family decided that it was more valuable to have whatever they could get auctioning them than it was for us to continue to exhibit the items. I make people now either agree to a term loan for a specific duration of time, not exceeding 5 years, or I tell them thanks but no thanks. I can't, for thinking about the future of the institution, reasonably accept multiple loans with indefinite terms. It's too dangerous. People get upset. If an item deteriorates, you can't do anything about it. I had an item when I first started as a curator at the Appaloosa Museum and Heritage Center in Idaho that was a side saddle. It was donated to the museum but they weren't very good about keeping track of paperwork. And it was donated with the understanding that it was going to be for kids to play on, which ultimately destroys anything. If you let children play on it, it's gonna have a limited lifespan. The daughter of the woman who donated it came and wanted the side saddle. It took me probably 2.5 months to find out what the saddle actually was, find out that it had been thrown away, find the donation paperwork that said it was for use by the children. And in the meantime, she absolutely slandered us at every opportunity for losing and destroying her mother's side saddle, until we found the letter from her mother explaining that she would like for children to play with it until such a time it was no longer serviceable.
Wow.
But, that's the problem with long-term loans.
I understand. Good thing you had that documentation.
It took a while to get it.
Wow. So this is Ted Ellis with Museum Studies, Southern University of New Orleans, with Curator Sarah Billion here at the Museum of the Gulf Coast. Thank you so much.
No problem.